I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Kate Gardner.
Your calling is where your greatest joy meets the world's deepest need. I think that feeling of being given not only money, but way more importantly, trust in terms of the actual relationship, what it changed me.
If people don't have clarity of purpose, whatever it might be, that's what's lacking.
Years ago, as I mentioned, I felt so much fear about, people are going to know this about me. People are going to take advantage of me. I came to this conclusion. I was like, actually, if I turn that assumption on its head, the people who are going to walk with me, the people who are going to see me in this and get me in this and help me as my friends are going to be amazing people.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacies series. I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Kate Gardner. Kate's enthusiasm, energy, level of encouragement is just really infectious in a great way. It's you're going to love her conversation, her perspective, her lived experience on this subject of philanthropy, but really more broadly, how she got there. There's this concept of sudden wealth syndrome, how individuals can come into a significant amount of wealth. And sometimes people attribute it to lottery winnings, but also inheritance, even in the monetization event of selling a company. And it can be a lonely place. It could be an isolating place, especially as a young person. And so Kate's going to go through and she's willing to share her journey from inheriting a significant sum of money at a very young age, and how she navigated that, worked through it, found community, found peer group, leaned into her faith and her faith journey in terms of how her beliefs shaped her thoughts, her taking control and having agency over her life of what that meant as an individual, as she's part of a family, and this discussion about legacy of the both and. How do you think about yourself and the legacy you're creating, as well as being part of a broader family? Kate is willing to cover a lot of ground here in a very open, transparent, and vulnerable way. And I am so encouraged by her willingness to participate in this dialogue with us. So I really want us to get in the conversation. Kate is unable to be in the studio, so we're going to have her join in right now. Kate, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I know you couldn't be in the studio here together, but to take the time out from your home and to be on this conversation, I think is so important. I just think so many people are going to be blessed with your words, your perspective, your lived experience, your insights as we walk through this. So thank you so much.
Thanks, John. It's an honor to be here.
As we talk, and I always start all the conversations, right? If the subject matter is entrepreneurial legacies, this word legacy, how do you define it? How do you think about it? What does that mean to Kate Gardner?
Yes, it's one of my favorite words. And I think it's the concept of the wake of your life, of what is the impact and influence that you have on people, both when you're alive and potentially after as well.
And so you and I first became acquainted through the book 31 Gospel Patrons from our joint friend, John Reinhardt, right? And I think both of us read his initial book, Gospel Patrons, and included 31 stories in here. I think we both feel honored and humbled to have been included in that book. And so that's how we first became acquainted through some of the production work that happened with the book and the rollout of the book. In going through the book, then, there's so much content. As I'm reading from others, I still don't know why John Reinhardt included me in there when I'm reading the stories of everyone else. And he was just being nice to me that day. But as I was reading through your segment, Kate, it's why I reached out and said, I'd love to have you as part of this conversation. We'll talk about business. We'll talk about entrepreneurism. But I do want to start with this legacy component. And I'm going to use some of the content in the book. Again, I encourage people to get a copy themselves, 31 Gospel Patrons by John Reinhardt. because I'm going to use some of your excerpts from your segment as launching points into various parts of this conversation, and then we'll wander and go from there. But actually, before I do that, I should have everyone get to know who's Kate Gardner. So can you introduce yourself, right? Because I just skipped right over that part of it, right? I was ready to dive right into the content here in the conversation. But why don't you go ahead and give a brief introduction of yourself, Kate, so that listeners get to know you.
Sure. Yes. Again, it's such a joy to be with you today, John. And yes, it's an honor to speak to everyone here. Again, my name is Kate Gardner. I am originally from Washington, D.C. I've been based in Nashville, Tennessee for the past years. And I have a story where I unexpectedly inherited wealth at age 21. And it's something that I've deeply wrestled with. I've faced it head on to my greatest abilities. It's been a journey very much influenced by my faith, by my values. And I am so grateful for what I've learned. I've been through a lot of hard things with that journey, as well as been able to spend time really focusing on philanthropy and impact work that I'm very grateful for. And now I spend a lot of my time trying to encourage others, whether they're inheritors, whether they're wealth stewards, on a similar journey.
And that's why we're here today, right? Is to encourage, inspire, educate. Some of the things that you do reference we'll come back to is like being in community, right? How did community come together and go through these items, especially when the world is going to have a whole lot of things to say about it. Social media is can be a powerful tool, right? And there's good resources and content, and then there's very misleading and not so good information that's out there. So we're going to dive into the good and some of the aspects that you shared, where some of the words, again, coming right out of the book. You said, should I focus on building a new legacy from scratch or stewarding the one I'd been given? And so that where I keyed in on is kind of that or. Is it an and or is it an or? Is there a new legacy or is there a legacy that you're a part of, that you've been given? So as you've been going through that, and I go back and I read my own words and I'm like, yeah, I'd probably say that differently today than I said it then. But as you even think about that aspect of it, right? How do you think about legacy now applied very directly to, are you creating one from scratch or are you stewarding the one you've been given?
Sure. Yes. And I loved how you said it, John, of looking back. We're always learning and growing, right? In our own journey. So yeah, I think at this point, I probably would use the word and rather than the word or in describing the idea of building on a previous legacy and leaving my own. I think it's probably a false dichotomy. I don't think it's even maybe possible to distinguish between those because we are all generational beings. And I like the idea that ultimately none of us are, quote unquote, self-made, that there's always influences, even just in terms of values, in terms of life experience that come down, storytelling from previous generations. So I definitely these days see myself as attempting to do both. And I think it's something that I feel very strongly about encouraging other stewards in as well, to take the time to really look back at the legacies they come from, especially those of us who come from family business families and have a defined external legacy, to see what it is that we want to take forward from that, as well as what are the shifts, what are the areas that we want to really make our own as well.
Did you find that that there was a burden aspect to being part of this family legacy, right? That aspect that was being given, where it's a blessing and a burden to have both sides of that. And then how hard was it to form your own purpose for your legacy, as actually an additional piece? So if you think about the burden, the blessing, and then also forming your own, how did you get your head around that?
Yes, I love that. Thanks for using those words, John, because I think the way I often describe it is I call it the burden of blessing, actually. So to really see those things, sometimes one and the same. The other word I love to use with wealth is the word complexity, because it is both at the same time. It is an incredible gift. It's something that I'm absolutely thankful for. It's opened up so many doors of opportunity, and it has created a ton of nuanced relationships, of feelings of overwhelm, of indecision, and having to consider these much bigger scale decisions than I thought I was going to have to at an early age than I expected. So I see those things really coming together for those of us who live lives of wealth stewardship.
And then how do you find your own personal identity and purpose in the midst of that, where you're part of and yet separate from, right, as an individual too?
Yes. So I think that the way I would describe my journey would be in, first off, really reckoning with what I've been given, not only, again, the financial money itself, but also the people, the businesses, the values. I think for me, it's taken a ton of looking at that head on. It's actually something I spend a lot of time encouraging other next generation family members to do, is not to avoid, is not to just, put it to the side. I sometimes describe this journey as a road where there are two ditches on the side. There's the one ditch that I think people assume much quicker, which is the ditch where you ruin your life, you recklessly spend, you make poor moral decisions, the classic sad stories and culture of that happening.
Yeah.
But I actually think there's also a ditch on the other side of the road where you don't do anything with it. And you just kind of are like, yada, yada, I'm not listening. And I'm just going to live a very normal, small life because I can't even deal with this. And to me, that's equally sad, actually.
Yeah.
Because I don't think people are truly becoming the most abundant version of themselves. And so I think in my story, especially the last 10 years now of walking this path, I've needed to look very closely at it and to make those decisions myself of what are the things that I want to move forward with and what are the things that I want to leave behind.
Yeah.
And I am the hugest fan of hiring therapists, coaches, people to journey with me in that, and giving myself the time and space to do that work.
Yeah. We haven't necessarily talked about this. I don't think we did. The book, as you were just sharing that, the book Strangers in Paradise keeps coming to mind.
Yes.
Right? And Jim Grubman's work in terms of this, and you just described it in the two ditches, and I'm hearing the two ditches. It's what Jim, kind of hit on in his research and also in the book in terms of the extremes of how people react to the wealth. And then all of a sudden I'm going to show that I'm richer than the richest, or I'm going to, bury it all and not do anything with it. And it ends up in these two polar opposites that are both unhealthy versus how you end up pursuing that. But then your point of saying now, how do I approach that? So let's share with individuals a little bit more of maybe what I'll call the wealth origin story, right? If we back up a few generations to give a little bit of context, and then go through a little bit more of saying, here's the context where you're living this out. You had mentioned in the book, right, that stems back to your grandfather established family traditions with giving his children an early inheritance. Can you build that out and put a little bit more color around that for listeners?
Absolutely. So the short story from my understanding is that my great-grandfather on my dad's side built and sold a very successful construction tool business. And that was part of the wealth that began to trickle down between the generations. My grandfather made the choice to give his son, who's my dad, an inheritance, a stock portfolio at age 18. And then my dad grew up with that and learned how to invest and make his own decisions. And then he and his brother started a financial media company that has become its own wealth creation. And out of that, my dad made the decision to give me a similar narrative, which is an account he started for me at birth, that at a certain age, and he chose the age 21, transferred fully into my ownership. And so since then, I got to, again, follow in the footsteps of really building my own legacy. I mean, I think that is one of the real actually benefits of a model like my father's family have followed, is it forces each generation to define its own path. I think there are some drawbacks to that model as well, and I'm very happy to talk about both. But it has given me a strong sense in a very literal physical sense and an emotional sense of having to create my own path with my own ownership.
And I want to keep on the storyline, but compliance would also make sure that I put in the disclosures that none of this is legal, nor financial or tax advice, and how we're nor investment advice as we're walking through this. For listeners to know, UTMA is under the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. It's custodial accounts for minors that age of majority turns over to them in their own ownership. There are aspects of that, Kate, again, not as a recommendation for anybody in terms of their legal structure or tax structure. But this is where sometimes, the funds getting turned over to an individual, a lot of times it's in through trust, and there's pros and cons of all of that. So I just want to even set that aside for a second, right, in terms of it. But all of a sudden now you have this account that had been built by your father, your parents, kind of going through now and presenting it to you at a relatively young age in terms of you going through it. One of the things that you noted in the book is sudden wealth syndrome is actually a scientific term. But that's what you felt, this sudden wealth syndrome. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about technically what that is. But how did that play out in the conversation now? Because it was an inheritance in the sense that on TV, right? Somebody passed away, the attorney's reading you a note and all this, right? You're actually sitting down at the table having this conversation with your parents. How did that go, and what were you feeling even in that moment?
Yes. And I do think that is actually one of the benefits of this model is that relational dynamic present. Like you said, it's not this posthumous, will reveal, but it was something that there were some great benefits to how they chose to give it to me. And yes, on my 21st birthday, my parents took me out to breakfast. And some of the most powerful dimensions of it were, I'll never forget my dad saying to me when he revealed to me the portfolio that he said, "I'm doing this for you because I believe in you. Me and your mother, we believe in you, and we want you to pursue your dreams." And I think that feeling of being given not only money, but way more importantly, trust, in terms of the actual relationship, what it changed me. And I actually think that there's a lot of spiritual dimensions to that, to my faith. As a Christian, I believe in many senses that the gospel, that the gift of Christ's death and resurrection is also a blessing of saying, go, take this and live a life of impact and service for the world. So I think that there were some incredible life-altering things, and very much why I'm spending my time telling my story and trying to inspire others to live into similar values is because of that bequeathing of blessing, really, on every level. There were also aspects of it where I felt very alone. I, of course, felt very different than my peers. And a lot of other hard things that I've struggled with it too. But again, those things have come very hand in hand.
Yeah. And so sometimes, right, to go through, and I do this from the aspect of naysayers that are out there, listening, going, well, why was it such a surprise, right? You grew up in this family. It sounds like across multiple generations. You're a young adult at that point in time, and sitting down and receiving this, and yet still there's a shock factor to that. And some people are like, well, why was it such a shock? So how did that play out? And then again, the words and and maybe even after the fact, right? Because you go through it, and your parents are still learning, right? Even, my grandkids are still figuring out, Pops, you're still learning like how to do this, right? And so everyone's still learning as we all go. When you reflect back on that time, maybe even in discussion, right, with your parents, like when you reflect back on that conversation, what would be done differently, how it was handled? What would you encourage others to say? Yeah, have these conversations. Don't wait, but it has to be age appropriate and in context of the capabilities of the individuals. What coaching would you give to people in those kind of settings?
Yes, I that's a very interesting question, John. I don't know if actually anyone's ever asked me that, of like, why was it a surprise? I like thinking about it from that angle. I totally agree with that sentiment. I think one of the best aspects of how my parents raised me as well was in a culture of abundance. And obviously that is a privilege, and that is something that I'm very humbled by. The choices that my family could make growing up, travel, schools, choices around philanthropy that I saw my parents model. And at the same time, to reference the concept you brought up of sudden wealth syndrome, which, yes, is one of my favorite things to talk about in this space, I think that there is this psychologically studied phenomenon where when a large amount of money is given at one time, the brain neurologically does not know how to handle it. And this is usually mostly applied to lottery winners. And there are statistics out there that show, people who are given tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars lose it all. And you're kind of almost like, how is that possible? Like, that is like so much money, But I think it shows that human architecture is not made to force that type of situation or to know how to handle it well. And I think inheritors, like myself, often go through that as well. And I think in my situation, I didn't know it was going to be millions of dollars. I thought that, yes, like I was comfortable in an atmosphere of abundance. And I think that is part of why I actually didn't squander it or spend it all or something like that. Because there was kind of this atmosphere of money is a blessing that I'm going to be able to use hopefully for the rest of my life, for me and my own family and for the good of the world. But there is definitely moments that some of us go through where there's an overwhelm, there's a trauma, a little t trauma, I might say, that needs to be healed from and recovered from. And absolutely, like you said, John, I in no way, hold blame for my parents. I know they were doing the best that they could. And again, my dad had a similar experience in his life. So I think there is, again, a generational pattern there. But I would definitely, per your question about how to counsel families, I think that there are many ways that more light, more conversation can happen that just alleviates feelings of eventual sudden wealth syndrome, for sure.
Yeah, I was speaking with a couple recently, and they're like, well, we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to make money the issue. And it's like, but by not talking about it, you're making money the issue, right?
Yes,
because all of a sudden you're making it now. Yeah, and it becomes a taboo if we're not talking about that. But it's like, but the kids are still looking around, right? Growing up into that, as you framed it, you realize you're growing up in this abundance, right? And the blessings and the trips and everything else that comes with that. And yet, right, there still is this shock of going, wow, it's become real. You mentioned lottery winners, right? That inheritance component of it. But it's way easier when individuals are alive to have the conversation over a breakfast table than it is to sit in the TV movie, attorney's office, in terms of finding out all of a sudden you receive this. And now there's no conversation to come from, and back with your parents as the relationship evolves. So I do want to go a little bit deeper into this sudden wealth syndrome, just after quick searches, quick definitions. I want to hit on a few aspects of this, but just so listeners come up to speed with it. Sudden wealth syndrome refers to the emotional and psychological distress that individuals may experience after acquiring a significant amount of money unexpectedly, such as through lottery winnings, inheritance, the sale of a business. The term was coined by wealth psychologist Stephen Goldberg in the 90s as he observed the unique challenges faced by individuals. Symptoms include isolation, guilt, fear of loss, identity crisis, impulsive spending. And again, a lot of people hear the stories of like lottery winners and the impulsive spending. And as one friend puts it, it's like they went out and bought a bunch of liabilities. They didn't buy assets from that impulsive spending. But isolation, guilt, fear of loss, identity crisis. I mean, did you feel some of that aspects of, soon after that breakfast meeting? Would you mind sharing just kind of like how you felt that and what was going on in your head? And then what you learned about that in retrospect, again, back to encouraging and coaching both, parents, grandparents, children, the inheritors, I mean, everybody, to make this as a conversation, not to make this taboo, which is even when it was a conversation with your parents, it still had this aspect to it and this dynamic, even though they were doing exactly what I encourage people is you got to talk about it.
Yes. Absolutely. So I definitely felt the aspects of isolation. I didn't tell anyone for years. I was really terrified. I mean, I was still in university, so I was terrified it was going to ruin my friendships. People are just going to see me so differently. I then proceeded to work for a couple different nonprofits the first few years out of college, and the money actually did come up and did really mess with those jobs that I had, which was very unfortunate for me at that early age. So there definitely, I like the word liability because there can be aspects of journeying with wealth that can bleed out into painful situations. So I feel like I've certainly faced my fair share of them in my 20s. But at the same time, I am really grateful looking back. I think in my own personal narrative, by age 21, as I would say, by the grace of God, had very much solidified my own faith, my own values. So I had a conviction when this inheritance came from my family that ultimately it wasn't even from them, it was from God. Mm-hmm. And there was complexity to that too, because there was aspects that it felt painful. Another thing that I really encourage families to consider with inheritance is to actually make it something that your next generation family members can opt into. So one of the aspects of my story, if I were to shift it, which I hope to do perhaps with my own kids one day, I would actually make it a choice. Because again, what happened in my situation was, to use a strong word, I was victimized by money, which might sound very strange because I think there's an assumption out there that everyone wants more money. You're not victimized. You always, but I actually don't agree with that. And I actually know a story, one of my favorite stories to share. I know a different family that had 2 daughters, and at age 18, they had portfolios prepared for those girls. And they made a tiny tweak that I actually think can make a huge difference in the psychological life of your inheritors, which is they sat down with the girls separately and they said, "We've prepared this for you. Do you want it?" And one girl said yes, and one girl said no. And I think that's because people know that money takes stewardship. It takes a lot of work to figure it out and make wise decisions. And so I think shifting that belief that, next gen's inheritors always just want more money, I don't think that's true at all. And I think in my situation, that is something that would have actually helped me a lot. Would have been that it would have been a choice that I opted into. Now, again, I've been able to reframe that for myself. I've been able to step up in my stewardship in a way that I'm really proud of, and I feel really empowered in now. But that would be one example to your question of choices that can be made.
And I love the word because it's one of those words that like we're going through right now in society very broadly, and it's the word wisdom. And how wisdom gets overlaid, because there's so much when we look back over time where there was, data leading to information and how it gets organized, and then information leading to knowledge. And each of these areas used to have, call it competitive advantages in the workplace and society, whatever. If you had more data, if you had more information than someone else, there was value in that. But now that data and information has been commoditized, so has knowledge. When we talk about this AI revolution that we're in and the ability to get knowledge encapsulated from, pick your platform that you want it from, that's coming to you, if you can write the right script to get at the core of what you want, you can get knowledge, right? You don't have to memorize it in textbooks. I mean, this is where it's going to be interesting how our education system evolves. But knowledge is now getting commoditized, and information and data are only feeders into knowledge. But the key thing becomes wisdom, and wisdom comes through the lived experiences. It comes from the mistakes that happen. It comes from the, fail fast and fail, quickly and learn from it and then move on. in terms of what not to do. And that discernment aspect of how wisdom gets applied is absolutely, when we look at, call it the information you can get on estate planning, documents and tax strategies and investments and everything else. I mean, you could get so much information that's there. The question then is, what do you do with the wealth that you have? How do you best organize that? Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? From Jurassic Park. And so how that comes together is that wisdom piece of it that applies. So how does wisdom get handed down then through the family? Do you, or from friends or from other professionals around you? Like, where does wisdom come so that you can make the best decisions for Kate in what you're trying to do and achieve?
Yes, I love the concept of wisdom. And I totally agree with you, John, that I think so much of it is by trial by fire, is through failing fast, failing forward. And again, I think that is actually one of the greatest advantages of inviting inheritors or learning wealth stewardship as a young person, is that I've had the opportunity to do that myself. I think especially, again, in the family office world or in, spaces where people are trying to do the right thing, which is the correct posture to have in terms of wealth transfer between generations. I think one of the issues is that there's such a fear around ruining the kids with money and
right.
around, allowing them to fail. But I actually think that that's the wrong posture to have. I think that you want them to make their own decisions and make their own mistakes so that they care and so that they learn. And I totally love that part of my story. And that's why I do encourage families to consider, in healthy, small, palatable amounts, wealth transfer at earlier ages, because then it also creates a lot more ownership. Like my life. I mean, I have stepped up in this. And again, I speak about it now because I have grown so much. I mean, I truly believe my journey with inherited wealth has actually made me a better person than not, by the grace of God, as I would say. And that's something that I love, seeking to testify about, is that you don't just have to see wealth transfer as a liability or a negative. You can see it as giving your next gen, shall we say, I want to say like a playground or something. I mean, that might sound too simple, but giving them their space to try things out. So that has absolutely been a big part of my journey. I've done that a lot in areas of philanthropy, in areas of relationships. And I'm so grateful for what I've learned.
Do you think, because under the UTMA structure that was set up, right, custodial, age majority, you receive this, it's yours. There's no strings attached. It's your money. It's now in your account, titled to you. If it came to you in a trust structure that had a whole lot of legal language wrapped around it, do you think it would be different? And when I say different, do you think it would be good because it would have guardrails for you? Do you think it would be bad because it would have restrictions for you? If it comes into trust, would it have diminished the words that were imparted upon you regarding the trust and the belief in who you are as an individual? And if so, then it's like, well, then why'd you put it in a trust? Have you thought at all about that dynamic of how it's actually received?
Those are great questions. Yes, absolutely. I learned this phrase recently, actually, called lawnmower parenting. Many people know the concept of helicopter parenting, but apparently there's this new idea that you're basically like creating a completely clear path before your kids. And it's like you're mowed it and then, walk down the path, and how that can be really dangerous. Again, back to this idea of allowing your kids to make mistakes. My joke in my situation is my parents really, in my situation, gave me the lawnmower, gave me the expensive lawnmower. They were like, figure it out. But I think that in a lot of trust structures, like you're mentioning, John, there can be this almost, I want to speak to the energy of it even more than the practical structuring. I think that if it comes alongside an energy of control, an energy of fear, I think you are going to create a lot of disempowerment in your kids. And we see this so much. I mean, I've seen statistics that something like, I need to find the actual statistic here, but something like 80% of trust beneficiaries don't like their trusts, which is crazy if you think about it, because that's like the goal of the parents is to, give goodness to the next generations. But I think many trust structures come with this feeling of like, oh, I just have to do what my parents want, or, oh, I just have to prove myself and that I'm, a goody two shoe next gen. Or again, the opposite of what my dad said to me, there's kind of this emotional experience of, oh, my parents don't trust me, or, oh, they don't believe in me. They're just trying to kind of like mitigate problems that I might create with my choices. And that's so sad. I honestly, that breaks my heart for next generation family members, because I think that is creating this almost like babysitting feeling that is really going to hamper their growth and them becoming the fullness of who they can be. So yes, as you can maybe tell, feel pretty strongly about how certain things can be structured. But I think there's always hope. I think so many of these things, including my situation and what was painful about mine, can be really assisted by emotional connection between generations, by having advisors and family office team members who are really encouraging and really authentic for next generation family members. I think, again, that was something that in my situation, I had to go out and find for myself, was my own team. And again, that's been hard, but I've really grown and I'm really happy with who I've become through that journey. So I think, again, there are pros and cons to any physical structuring, but I think, again, if you really sit with what is the experience, energetically, emotionally, relationally, that I'm giving to the next generation through the structuring that I am considering, and making it a conversation with them, even. That's one of my ways of thinking about it.
Well, and it's that conversation. It sounds so simple, right? And cliche in some ways, right? But if we can all communicate better, we'd all actually be way better off. But how many individuals don't even find out about the inheritance piece until after somebody's passed away? And now they're looking at the trust for the first time after the grantors and creators have passed away. And now there's no context, right? Or the context is coming from the professional team that was there. And if the subsequent generations, the inheritors, weren't at the table as part of that conversation, they're just, they could trust, but there's always just this asterisk in their mind of going, well, what did, mom and dad or grandparents or aunts, what were they really thinking when they put this legal language together, versus what the individual may have guided in that dialogue. So having that conversation, having the words, we trust you, Kate, and go forth and do this, was, maybe one or two lines, one or two sentences, but it sounds like that was the empowerment and the launch pad to give you the persistence to navigate through all of the other things that came with it that we've already talked about.
Absolutely, John. And if I may add one more point to that, I think, again, just coming back to this idea of things being a conversation, I think wealth creators or, previous generations put so much pressure on themselves to figure it out for the next generation. And again, there's an aspect of that is true, right? It is their responsibility to actually make the legal decisions. But I think that can be reframed in such a powerful way where why not make it a conversation? I've had many conversations with wealth creators where they'll say things to me like, oh, well, my kids would never want to steward a foundation. No, they wouldn't want that. And I'm like, have you asked them? Like, have you just point blank had a conversation about, kids, what do you want? Again, I said it earlier, like, do you want money? But you could ask it more broadly. Do you want to do group philanthropy? And I think parents are so scared of having those conversations, but I think really it's not about the money, right? It's about the emotional dynamics underneath it. And that's the work, right? And that's why I'm so passionate about personal development these days, because I think that's where there's such an opportunity for people to grow in their sense of identity that really has nothing to do with their business, with their money, and then to hopefully create a sense of safety within a family structure of saying this is going to be a group conversation, and we're going to listen to each other. We're gonna express support. We're going to forgive. We're going to extend grace. all those things, like you said, that go back to healthy communication, that's the treasure. And that's what's going to create the longevity of the resources that I think people want.
So I just love your enthusiasm, right? And your passion and that aspect of the encouraging. So last year, on this podcast series, I did a 3-part on family governance. And the guests, all the conversations came back down to the conversation of having a conversation, right? It's almost this cliche aspect. And then you go forward in terms of how do you prepare the heirs for the assets, and way too much time in the industry. And you and I were talking about, right? Yes, professionally, Clearwater Capital Partners. This is what we do as a multifamily office wealth management firm in terms of working with families. And I think there's still a disproportionate amount of time spent on preparing the assets for the heirs and not the heirs for the assets. And so this, the time on legal documents and tax and financial, and it's all ticked and tied, and everybody knows exactly how that's going to play out. But then is the next generation, are the inheritors, are the heirs ready to receive what may be coming their way? And if not, that ends up blowing it up, and all of the good intentions of what was done on the financial planning, the estate planning strategies, everything else, I don't want to say it's for naught, but it actually is less powerful than it could be if you had those conversations and prepared the heirs for the assets. So I love your enthusiasm for it, your passion. I want to come back to the philanthropic side in a moment, but one of the items that comes out, management and coping strategies of dealing with this sudden wealth syndrome, seeking professional help, right? Financial advisors, but also therapists, psychologists. I mean, it is a broad network in terms of the processing of it. Having the comprehensive wealth management plan, educating yourself, again, back to a conversation. You can't get, people can go off and read books or listen to podcasts or do whatever else, but you need to sit down and do the heavy, and building a support network, trusted friends, family, professionals. You had mentioned that, just feeling alone, feeling isolated, feeling that aspect of loneliness. So that creation of community, sounds like you had to create a community, not only with your own professional network of individuals working with you, but also others that were in a peer group, right? And this term peer group is like, who truly are your peers when you think about that? How did you process that? How did you work through that? And how do you look at it? You're not throwing out your old friends, but you're also saying, okay, there's certain conversations that are just different, right? How do you handle the different that's there without making it strange, and just so that you feel comfortable going through it too?
Absolutely. It's such a great question. And it's been such a journey for me. And I feel like I've learned so much, which I'm so grateful for. So going back to what I mentioned earlier, for a couple of years there, I didn't tell anyone about the money. It was just, again, it felt way too dangerous, way too like a liability relationally. I then started to really lean into philanthropy personally. And and I know, John, obviously we share that passion through Gospel Patrons and those models. So once it kind of started to become a little bit more of a vocational path for me, I think it started to hit me. I was like, I'm not going to be able to hide this. Like, it's not going to work. And I have, had some funny moments, some comedy encounters that came out of that journey of confusing people of what I was doing vocationally, not on purpose, but all to say that I had a major reframe, which I love sharing with people, that has really become an anchor for me in my journey with relationships. Years ago, as I mentioned, I felt so much fear about, people are going to know this about me. People are going to take advantage of me. People are going to judge me as a trust fund kid. People are going to, reject me, whatever. But I had this moment. I was on a retreat, and I came to this conclusion. I was like, actually, if I turn that assumption on its head, the people who are going to walk with me, the people who are going to see me in this and get me in this and help me as my friends are going to be amazing people, because they're going to have the maturity to do that well. And to not use me for money, and to not, see it in this like black and white, unhelpful lens. And that changed everything for me. And I think now, it's gotten to the place where I do have a wide variety of friends. I would say the majority of my friends have nowhere near the financial assets that I have, but my friends know this about me. My friends empathize with me. My friends are with me in the journey and the decisions that I make. And that's changed everything, because again, it doesn't feel like something where this half of my life is this dangerous hiding energy, but it's something where integration and wholeness is present. And of course I do. And yeah, John, I'm happy to talk more about, what I've done personally in this space in terms of creating community for other inheritors directly. But I think just really getting to that, belief level reality where I don't see the money as a liability, but I actually see it as something that's going to attract people who have the capacity to see me, and the nuance of it was so huge.
Right. And it's attraction. And then there's also the discernment, the wisdom, and the judgment regarding it's going to attract some where you're like, yep, thank you, stay away. Right.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
then making sure you got the right community around you. But let's go a little bit deeper then into the philanthropic piece. One of the items you wrote again in the book, I plucked up courage and created a plan and then sent out checks to ministries that had meant a lot to me. Although the act of giving originally felt like sober obedience, the process was more fun and the fruit of the gifts more tangible than I could ever have expected. So it sounds like there was a moment in time where you sat down with a checkbook and you started going, I need to do this. So like, what was the leading up? What was the catalyst? Like what you said, I plucked up the courage. Why did it take courage to do that? Like leading up. And then what did you realize and experience that far exceeded your expectations?
Yes, one of my favorite parts of my journey to share. So the quick summary of my foray into philanthropy is around age 23. So again, out of university, first kind of reckoning with what is my career direction, what is, in my language, God asking me to do with my life. I had a pastor in my life who taught that you don't just tithe what you make, you tithe anything that you're given. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my goodness, I guess that applies to me. And I now feel spiritually obliged to give away a larger amount of money as a tithe. And I took it on. And I went through this whole process of studying the tithes in the Old Testament of the Bible. And I saw that there were 3 tithes out of the book of Deuteronomy chapter 14 and a couple other places in the Old Testament. And long story short, created this network of this framework, of 3 tithes. And then I filled those in. And again, for the sake of time, I could definitely go deeper into it. I love talking to people about it. But I broke it down, and I basically decided to write checks to organizations and people who had meant a lot to me over my first 21 years of life that hit those 3 categories. And then like you read the quote, John, I had moments in doing this. Some of the checks I wrote anonymously. A couple of my larger checks, I actually offered to make it a matching gift to the organization so that it could be doubled in its impact. And I had these experiences of joy and a couple stories of how that gift did mean so much to them. And my favorite story is there was an organization that I had benefited from, that I had participated in their ministry school. I knew a lot of the team, and I was able to write them one of my larger checks. And the COO called me. I was like, "Hey, we know you. We know you're like 23. How are you giving us this amount of money?
What's going on? What's going on here?
What is this?" And, I explained a little bit about my story with it. And the guy said, well, Kate, you wouldn't know this, but this amount of money and the match grant that I made it is actually saving this organization this month. Wow. We were in the red, and this is the saving that we needed. And that wrecked me, like, to feel in a good way, to feel, in my language, used by God, to feel like my philanthropy was doing something way beyond what I could have made up or expected. Really gave me a sense of calling and a sense that this was a legitimate path that I could choose with my impact. And then reading the book Gospel Patrons and seeing throughout history that there's examples of business people who chose to come alongside and support people in ministry and play a very sacrificial, very hidden role, but one that was needed to see these ministries flourish, again, wrecked me. And I had what I call, one of my few, encounters with God in my life, where I felt this phrase well up in me, where I felt like God said, you could do this. This could be your story. And that's what I have really given my life to in the last, 7 years. And then kind of coming up with a philanthropic mission statement and a very specific focus for my philanthropy was another season that I went through. And then now seeing this whole world of family wealth as a mission space, in a sense, for myself. And out of my own story. Those are a bit of the high level points.
Well, in this overlay, because there's a lot of people, talk about philanthropy very broadly, may not even share, the same belief system that you do, that I do as a Christian. But what I love about the word philanthropy is it's philos and anthropos. Philos root is brotherly love, right? Anthropos is about mankind. From a Christian worldview, it's the second part of the great commandment, right? Loving your neighbors as yourself. So this aspect of going, how do you love mankind? How do you love people? It's through philanthropy. It's very tangible in the nature of it. So whether listeners share the same belief system that Kate has by demonstrating philanthropy, you're loving people. And frankly, that's what Christians should be doing more of in terms of living generously in making a difference in the world regarding how that plays itself out. There's also, we talk about mistakes that get learned, where wisdom comes from. What have you learned where there were some mistakes of checks that went out that were like, okay, you know what? On second thought, I'm probably not going to support in this way again. So how do you start framing the philanthropic strategy for yourself?
Yes. So I think there's so many joys in philanthropy, which again, that is, something that I really want to impart to people, is that it is so fun to live a life of giving. And so please hear that, loud and clear. At the same time, it is incredibly hard, and it can create a lot of nuance, a lot of complexity, as I like to talk about. So I have faced a lot of situations where I feel like people only see me for my money, where there's always kind of or not always is too strong, but there's, fear about a hidden motive. Why is this person reaching out to me? Especially someone who's felt led to be more public with my story for the purpose of trying to inspire others. I have felt at times like, people know this part of me. And so there can be those questions of, why is someone, getting in touch with me again? But I am a huge believer in the goodness of humanity. So I always try to come at philanthropy from that angle and give people the benefit of the doubt. But I do think, narrowing in on a philanthropic lane is something that, again, I continue to iterate on this in my life, but I would highly encourage other people to do this. Again, it's hard, super hard. I'm also the sort of person who loves responding to requests and, opportunities that feel very, spontaneous or hopefully spirit led, that sort of thing. So all to say, I've over, 8 years of doing this basically full time, created a couple different lanes of philanthropy for myself. One of the quotes that I have come back to over and over again, I love to encourage people in, is by an author named Frederick Buechner. And my paraphrase is, your calling is where your greatest joy meets the world's deepest need. And I actually...
You say that again, because I actually underlined that too. And can you say that one more time for listeners? Yes, they may be spacing off in their car listening to this right now, right? Can you say that one more time? I think
totally.
It is really important.
Thank you. So the quote is, your calling is where your greatest joy meets the world's deepest need. And to make it real for me, so I took this quote on. I actually, again, had this spiritual experience of feeling like I was called to answer that question. And for me, what I came up with, my joy is encouragement, that I get a lot of joy out of seeking to bring joy to others and to uplift them and give them energy and give them a boost on doing good work and living good lives. So that's my joy, is encouragement. The world's deepest need, what came to me when I did this exercise again 7-8 years ago, was missions. And how, for me, the extension of faith, the extension of the knowledge of a good God, of a loving Father, of a gospel of salvation, that was the world's deepest need. And so that is where I came up with my very specific philanthropic vision, to encourage missionaries. And that's what I did. I basically was like, all right, I got to find missionaries to encourage. So I cold called about, I think, 20, 30 missions organizations. And I was like, hello there. I would love to meet some missionaries to encourage, which I had so much fun with. And I think I messed with a lot of people's boxes, because I think usually, right, in that position, the missionaries are reaching out to people.
Right.
Try to find, support. So I really enjoyed kind of turning that on its head. Again, just out of a feeling of calling, and obedience to God.
Mhm.
So all to say that that is how I built the majority of the philanthropy that I still do to this day. Again, I've continued to iterate. Another one of my iterations was actually to not only give financially, and even with the missionaries, I continue to give financially, relationally, and spiritually. I also feel very strongly called to prayer, to intercession for people, and then also to relationship and to, personal encouragement. And so anyway, so I had those three kind of operating in tandem. And there've been more iterations. I bought a home to do hospitality ministry. So not just financial, but opening up space for nonprofit work to happen, and many other iterations. But those have been some of the biggest ones.
There's and regular listeners know, because I say this all the time, money only flows to one of three places: your family, right? Those things that you want to do, spend it on, consume it, right? Friends, how you're approaching that, charities that you'd want to give to and support, or taxes. That's it. There's no other place that money actually goes other than those three buckets. And so when some people say, yeah, but philanthropy is not my thing, I still think people are philanthropists. They're just involuntary philanthropists. They allow taxes, they allow government and policymakers to spread the money around based on how they believe it makes the society better. So you're still a philanthropist. You're just choosing to give through taxes, and not redirecting resources in other ways, in a proactive and an active philanthropist. So you can choose to be a voluntary or involuntary philanthropist, but you're one of those two. And what you're saying is you're choosing to be a voluntary philanthropist, which is hard because you have the front end strategy. So in the framework, as we think, right, you got the front end strategy of going, okay, how do you redirect taxes to philanthropic causes? How do you steward and manage that? Because it's not just flowing through, but how do you end up with that pool? And then how do you sow, right? How are you sowing those resources to the right places? And that's what we're talking about now, in terms of saying, well, here's the end recipients and the beneficiaries of that have got great stories behind them, and some that are like, okay, you run, wrote, check, maybe you wouldn't give it again, whatever. You change and you continue to evolve, which takes work into itself. And this is the part when people think about for-profits and nonprofits. Why does the tax status dictate how it should be done? The excellence that's there, that comes with it. But you had mentioned that some people, when you're talking about, okay, there's this role of sowing, right, distributing resources with nonprofits and how you're working it. That some people, if I heard you correctly, right, will look at that and they're like, what are you talking about? How is that a thing? How is that a role? How is that a job? How do people react to you in that way when you explain what it is that you do and how you approach the world?
Great question. It's honestly one of the things I have struggled with the most in my life of doing this. But it's good. I mean, I feel like, again, it's stretched me. It's really built my emotional intelligence of, what sides of my life do I want to share with people.
Mhm.
I say a lot of different things when people point blank ask me on the street what I do. Sometimes I say women's ministry because I walk with a lot of women in their spiritual life, and I love that side of my life. I rarely say I'm a philanthropist. I feel like that comes with a bit of an ego
Mm.
feeling that obviously I don't want to give. I sometimes say I'm an investor because, of course, I steward for-profit assets that sustain me in my giving, in addition to my nonprofit assets. So I've really grown through having to look at that question over and over again. Really, it's
Mm.
the bigger question of how do you define work if you don't have to work for money? And I feel very passionate about that. I love walking with people in that journey because it's hard. It's really hard to come up with something. Again, it sounds like a dream. It sounds like
Yeah.
the goal, right? So I want to validate that that is many people's goal. But I think once you get there, there's this feeling of, wow, I have no idea what to do with
Right.
that life. That's again, when we talk on the psychological level, back to sudden wealth
Yeah.
syndrome, there is a lot of shifting there. And I continue to iterate a lot, but I'm happy with where I've come to. I've come to with currently defining my career as what I call my mini single family office that I manage. And I gave that a brand. That's my name, Kinveris, which Kin means family, Veris means true. So the goal of my stewardship is to create an experience of true family,
Mm.
which is so much my actual intention for my life. So that's felt solid for this season. But again, I've gone through many iterations
Yeah.
through the journey.
Oh gosh, there's so many items I keep going through in my mind. Uh, Two of them right out of the gate. One is just an observation because under the sudden wealth syndrome, one of the other aspects that's there that could be triggering for people is when they have a monetization event. The company sells, businesses sell, and I've got families that I serve that it's like, well, the monopoly money just turned into real cash. It's like, well, yeah, but it was always there, right? There was always a value of that asset. It just happened to be illiquid in your company. But now you have this. And there's still that is an aspect of the sudden wealth syndrome. Even though you had the asset, when it converts to cash, it's just a different emotional item. And just a observation and also academic, the aspect of how people process that, the lack of purpose on the backside, how you describe work when you don't have to work for money, right? It is that lack of purpose. If people don't have clarity of purpose, whatever it might be, that's what's lacking, and how that manifests itself in whatever work is actually playing itself out, how the human capital gets lent into new endeavors. It's just a change and a reforming of that capital bucket intellectually and with the time and talent versus the necessarily the quote unquote need for the financial capital. And all of that does get well wrapped into that sudden wealth syndrome. But the item that I want to come back to you on is, you mentioned it, and it does, as a woman navigating this, right? Unique, different challenges as a woman navigating this, or if you saw yourself, as a man, as a peer, individual that was navigating the same set of circumstances, how would you compare and contrast that to say, what are some of the unique things that women need to be considering as they're processing this, given your experience, observations, interactions, all of the above?
To give some reflection, the finance world is I think goes without saying very male dominated, and I think a lot of women, and I think women find themselves around money in many different ways. I think for many people it is through marriage, it is through their husband, right? Um, and that comes with its own set of challenges that I have so much empathy for. That has not obviously been my personal experience, but I think there's a whole journey there of empowerment to care about stewardship and to see it as something that you can use your voice and you can, make an impact, that it doesn't just have to be your husband's thing or your father's thing, that it can be
Mhm.
something that you step up in. And I have, chosen to do that. And I'm really happy about it. I think I've pioneered a path that I hope many other women will join in, of doing our own philanthropy and wanting to make an impact through money. So I think that there's so much there. I think there is a real growth in confidence that I certainly have been through myself. I've been through multiple iterations of hiring people, and I've had some very painful experiences of feeling like I was treated in a very patronizing way, in a way that was not honoring to my agency, which I have. So I've had to face some really tough moments with much older men. But again, I think that's really built my confidence as a young woman. And because again, I have the ownership piece that I've really, again, trial by fire, developed even more of a healthy identity, hopefully through those situations. So I think, per the question, to speak to women out there, I think that there would be a real sense of again, caring about money. Then I think there would be an empowerment to use your voice, to know that even if you feel oppressed or misunderstood, to keep using your voice, to not give up. And then back to the idea of community. I think trying to build connection with others. I'm in multiple women support groups around financial stewardship, and that's been a wonderful place for me to feel safe, and on multiple levels of my stewardship. So I think there's a lot there. I also have so much honor for men and the leadership that men have often with money. So I want to make that very clear too. That I really do. I want that in my life as well. Healthy masculinity to be present. So there's a lot of nuance to it, but I appreciate you asking, because I think there is a lot there.
Yeah, and I want it for, I've got 3 children, right? My 2 daughters, adult daughters, and, my son's girlfriend, in terms of how they're operating as individuals, and the conversations and the open dialogue. And I want it for them. I know we as a firm, it's a big deal. I mean, Valerie, that's one of the wealth advisors in our family office practice area, and how we continue to look at that, because it's this, again, back to why I hate this industry, but love what I do, because of the nature of the industry and the way it's structured, right? You said, male dominated, ends up being older too. There's more, I forget the statistic, but there's more older men than there are younger individuals within the industry very broadly, within wealth management, which is a challenge in the industry itself. And more women are going to be controlling wealth than men, over this next decade. So it's like all these statistics are well known, and yet it's just bizarre regarding sometimes how the industry operates, which I think is just, it's a shame. Amy Hart Klein and Dennis Jaffe wrote a book. Amy is the part of the Pitcairn family office. And so her book, which I think is pretty powerful, it's Finding Her Voice, Creating Her Legacy. And because it does speak to women, controlling wealth, coming into wealth in a lot of different ways. They're the wealth creators, or they married, or whatever, right? Whatever the dynamic is in terms of inheriting it. But it should be a conversation for people to be processing this. And then you overlay, as a Christian going, yeah, there's the responsibility, the giftedness, and how that plays itself out with respect to stewardship, that everyone has different roles in that. And that's men and women equally in terms of how they're thinking about it. So I think it's just an area that the industry gets very wrong. But I'll get off my soapbox for a second too.
I appreciate it.
But as we start winding down here to final words of wisdom, one of the 3 words, so this kind of captures it in the end of the book, back to 31 Gospel Patrons, and a little bit of rapid fire with you too. So the 3 words you included here that you want to be remembered by are wholehearted, noble, and loving. So what do you mean by wholehearted, noble, and loving?
So wholehearted, I think, is this idea of living holistically and integrating mind, body, spirit, doing things out of an authenticity and an all-in type of posture. Nobility, I think, speaks to my desire to live a life of character, to be a person of integrity. And that way more, I've thought about this a lot, way more than, the things I do on the outside, is the person I am on the inside. That matters, I think, before God in my faith tradition, and in even me feeling peace and wholeness inside of myself now. And then loving, I think, has to do with that external orientation of wanting to live a life of impact with, my current personal branding being about true family, wanting to treat others in a sense of we're all connected. We all just, can we help each other? Can we uplift humanity and come from a posture, again, that's not only about a financial transaction, even being a philanthropy gift, but being a posture of I want to express love globally, and that being the effect that I have on people is the goal.
And you do have a global view of the world. I mean, you do look at yourself as a global citizen traveling, and so we can do a little bit of rapid fire here then. We'll keeping it short, 1-2 word answer, however you want to approach that, right? Favorite, most recent vacation destination?
Ooh, Cape Town, South Africa. So beautiful.
Favorite cuisine then?
Italian. I love pasta.
Favorite, most recent book that you've read that you'd encourage others to get a copy of?
Ooh, well, this might sound a little self-perpetuating. That's okay, but I have been continuing to look at my own book, which is called Becoming Ascendants, which is a framework that my co-author Parker Samuelson and I put together around how to encourage families in multi-generational stewardship. So if that's okay, I'll shout out to that.
Well, no. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to move off my rapid fire, right? We can flex here, right? Let's move off the rapid fire a little bit then too. Where are you at in the process then of launching the book?
We recently came out with a second edition, so that's part of what's been on my mind. But yes, it's a short little book. My co-author and I actually also have a podcast called Ascendants, which is the idea of being a descendant of a successful family ascending into your own identity and impact. So we do interviews with other inheritors and next gens. Then we condense what we learned into a framework that we then published as a little book that we've had a lot of fun sharing with the world.
And so what are some of the items that have come out of that work that's just like surprised you then by talking to your peer group, pulling people together? Like what's back to that, what's the world's greatest need? What is the greatest need for that cohort of individuals?
Oh, great question. The way we frame the book, and if I try to summarize it briefly, would be that we help people understand where they are in their journey with two areas. One area of authority, which is the idea of how much agency do you have over stewardship, and then also the area of stewardship itself, meaning how well are you doing with the amount of authority that you have. And we actually have created this 4-quadrant framework where you plot yourself and then maybe your family members or your community on that. And then you consider how can you grow both in your authority and your stewardship, and basically attempt to move up and to the right on our graph. So that is one way we encourage people.
So when individuals ask, it's like what, our clientele at Clearwater Capital, it's this aspect of first generation entrepreneurial wealth creators and those that think like them. And a lot of people then tilt their head and look at me like, what are you talking about? Right. And there's an aspect you can get back to. We all have family lineages, but you can also usually mark a point in time where there's the first generation wealth event that was created from a business, and typically is where it comes from. But then where subsequent generations are thinking like first generation. Why? Because it's doing exactly what you're saying. They're taking agency of themselves, right? They're taking control. They're seeing back to our beginning part of the question regarding or and regarding you can create your own legacy and be part of something that's bigger. And that's somebody that's thinking like a first generation creator, where they're like, yeah, I'm part of this. Maybe I got a head start in life and whatnot, and I've got some tools in my basket that I can use that others, don't have. But I'm not just relying on that and resting on that. I do have agency. I do have control. I do have authority over my own life. And here's how I want to live it out and go create my own too. So I just love that combination. So if people want to learn more, they could search where to find it.
So the book is on Amazon, and again, it's called Becoming Ascendants. And that second word is ascend ants. Again, the combination of ascendant and descendant.
And so I encourage individuals. I got to go out now and get a copy myself too. So I apologize for not having a copy of that. But closing thoughts, words of wisdom, words of encouragement. Wisdom and encouragement is probably a good combination here for this conversation. How do you want to leave listeners today, Kate?
Well, I have just loved being here with you, John. And I think I honestly, just even having conversations like the one that you and I are having, I think are just so needed for where our world is going. I'm sure, many people listening are aware of what's called the Great Wealth Transfer, which is the idea of just trillions of dollars that's about to pass from one generation to the next. You mentioned, more women are set to inherit money than men are actually. So I'm just so happy that we've been able to, look at these topics. And I think I would encourage listeners to do the same, to really consider in their own life, in their own journey, where they are in those world happenings and how they feel about them. I would definitely encourage people to put it bluntly, go to therapy, to hire coaches, to journey with them wherever they find themselves on the spectrum of stewardship, and also to have healthy communication within family systems with, advisors like yourself, John, who care and are asking these sorts of questions and want to open up this level of dialogue, and also to spread that sentiment, to be the one to take charge. There's a concept in the family office world I love, which is called the family champion, which is a person who maybe doesn't necessarily get paid or have a title or anything like that, but they just care. And they want to step up and be the kind of hoorah energy to motivate others to use money for good and to discern where their family needs to make decisions and move forward in different areas of stewardship. So I think to be that person or to participate in whatever way that you feel called as well.
Kate, thank you so much for carving out the time, being here, having this conversation, sharing your life's experience, very vulnerable, but your openness, your transparency. I hope listeners can take away some thoughts, ideas as they process regarding how to have those conversations within their own families, to not make it taboo, to realize that there could be, a shock that comes across in the conversations within the family. So don't wait, right? Don't have those conversations, age appropriate, right? Individual appropriate, where it's a healthy dialogue, but it's very empowering to the recipient, the family members, and how they're approaching it. And if people aren't encouraged by listening to you and you're sharing and, what you've been doing, I mean, this is where I think we all look forward and there's a lot of hardship in the world and the news flow that is just, really hard at times. But the stories and what you're sharing and what you're experiencing, is hope. And the hope I know is, in the right place, right? In terms of where your motivations come from, your faith, you've shared that. That is where you derive power and energy from in terms of fulfilling your work and living that out. So I don't want that misplaced by listeners in any way, but you sharing your story is really encouraging and inspiring, I think, to many listeners that are out there. So I do encourage them, get a copy of Ascendance, get a copy of 31 Gospel Patrons, get a copy of the original book, Gospel Patrons, at gospelpatrons.org. And listeners, if you want to continue the conversation, learn more in dialogue, contact us at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. With that, have a blessed day.